Well, good afternoon. Thank you all for being here and attending this afternoon's session. My name is Brian Robatic. I am the Radiation Oncology RFC representative. I am at the University of North Carolina, currently finishing up my last year of residency. Today I have the honor of introducing Dr. Robert Barr. Dr. Barr is a private practice neuroradiologist and immediate past president of the Mecklenburg Radiology Associates in Charlotte, North Carolina. He completed his residency and fellowship at the University of California, San Francisco, before beginning his clinical practice in Charlotte. Dr. Barr is the current vice president of the American Society of Neuroradiology, the ASNR, as well as chair of the Novant Health Medical Group Board of Trustees. And he was recently appointed to the position of Secretary-Treasurer of the ABR Board of Governors. Today, we are privileged to have him join our session and provide us his insight and tips for successful leadership, what I wish I knew back then. Dr. Barr?
Well, thank you very much, Brian, and thank you, Courtney, and the RFC for putting together this great session. I'm going to try to go fast, so hopefully leave a couple time for questions at the end. As soon as I figure out how to work this. There we go. So, why am I talking about this? This is going to be, you've already heard about how to figure out what job you want. You've already figured out how to get the job. Now you've been a couple years in practice. What's going to make you successful, particularly as you rise into a potential leadership position? Or how do you figure out who are the right people in your group or department to rise into those positions, and how do you help them along? Chances are that many of you in the room today, if you're not already, will one day be called upon to take a leadership role in your group or in your department. And I know it seems like a long time to you, but to me it seems like just yesterday I was in your shoes and sitting in this room and had no idea about these kind of things. I started practice in 1995. After a couple of years in practice, I was elected to the board of directors in our group. And then after another few years, I was surprisingly urged to run and serve as president of the group. And I thought at the time my only qualification was that I just worried about things more than anybody else in the group. I really didn't feel like I had a particular strategy for growth or change. I had absolutely no leadership training of any kind. And I shared my worries, as I'm apt to do, with several of the senior partners at the time, thinking I could talk them out of this idea. And they said, "That's great. We don't want you to do anything. Just don't mess it up." So luckily we survived, but I still had some bad tendencies. I tended to be too negative. I'm a worrier. I spent too much time reacting to problems, and those were mainly external problems, things like turf issues, contracting, hospital relations, I really didn't focus enough attention, I think, on internal dynamics of the group. I was better at sharing all my worries than I was at articulating a vision of the kind of group that I thought we could become, and at inspiring and enabling others to help us reach those goals. So, admittedly, I am no Colin Powell, but over the years I have learned a fair amount about private practice radiology management. And if dealing with failure, as Colin Powell says here, is any measure of success, then I'm perfectly well qualified to speak to you about leadership. My real hope is just to get you to start thinking about it in a way that I had done when I was in your shoes. There's really no right way to lead. There probably are several wrong ways. So if even one or two things I say here stick with you afterwards and inspire you maybe to read or reflect more about leadership, I'll be perfectly content. I'm not going to focus on the tasks of a leader, but I can dispense with that really quickly thanks to General Petraeus. A leader's main tasks are to determine the right strategy for the organization, communicate that strategy, oversee the implementation of the strategy, and then modify and repeat. What I am going to talk about is what's unique about private practice setting. I'm going to give you my list of keys to successful leadership, and then I'll highlight some tips and pearls from practice. So what is it that's unique about the private practice setting for leaders? Well, there's minimal tangible additional benefits. There's maybe some administrative time. There's often little or no extra pay. There's little career mobility. Most private practice leaders, they tend to just get folded back into the group after a period of time, as I have done. I've stepped down after 12 years just this year. And some groups even have term limits and specific intentional rotation. There's less control than you might think of in a typical business as a leader or even a non-hospital-based practice. It's less hierarchical. And therefore, really the thing you focus on is the relationship with hospital administration. The degree to which you can have a voice in hospital deliberations can really impact your practice. Also unique about private practice settings is this less hierarchical, egalitarian structure. In the typical practice, everyone's equal and everyone gets one vote. We are all each other's bosses and our own bosses. And power rests with the shareholders, rests with some collective group psychology. So your success in that setting really comes from learning to understand and appreciate group dynamics and what's the absolute best way to practice for that potential situation. Well, that's reality TV. In particular, I would suggest Survivor. Forget the bug eating contests and the feats of human endurance, although sometimes even those feel familiar in practice. But the group dynamics, the alliances, the decision making are not too dissimilar. And neither is the complicated relationship between the group and the group's leader. There's usually kind of a delicate balance between power and trust. Somebody tends to take leadership, but if they get too far out in front of the rest, they get eaten up or voted off the island or whatever. So with that as background, what would I rate as the keys to successful leadership in a hospital-based private practice? Optimism is critical. This is clearly not unique to private practice setting or even a medical practice. To quote Colin Powell, perpetual optimism is a force multiplier. This is said to be what separates managers from leaders. A manager is the person who gets things done, who handles problems, who keeps things organized. The leader is one who inspires others and motivates them to action. And you just can't motivate other people by being negative. Your job is to inspire others, not to be what I consider myself at times, the warrior in chief. Optimism is critical, but it's one of the last lessons I learned, so I'm going to stick it down here at the bottom. You want to inspire others, but aiming to be an inspiration is an impossible task. What is an achievable task is being positive, being optimistic. This is something you can control. Nobody wants to be around a whiner. So what belongs at the top of the list? According to Warren Buffett, if you're looking for a leader, find someone that's intelligent, energetic, and has integrity. If they don't have the last, be sure they don't have the first two. If you have somebody who lacks integrity, you want them to be dumb and lazy. And I love this quote. Obviously, he's being deliberately ironic, but I don't think he's entirely joking. Norman Schwarzkopf said it similarly and emphasized the relative importance of strategy. Leadership is a potent combination of strategy and character, but if you must be without one, be without the strategy. And now I'm on a tangent, but Mike Tyson really said it best. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Strategy is important, but there are other qualities, and these are personal qualities like character, integrity, which really determine ultimate success. So integrity obviously goes at the top of the list. Most groups have a hard time articulating what this is, but they can sure sniff it out when it's missing. And that's the kiss of death for a leadership position. No one wants a leader they don't trust or that they think is in it for themselves. And unfortunately, that means that most groups are naturally suspicious of anyone that wants to be a leader. The more reluctant, the better. This whole concept of reluctant leadership is a fascinating one, but we don't have time to go into it. Buffett's other key qualities, intelligence and energy, I'm going to put third and fourth. I'm leaving a little bit of room for something else, which I'll get to, but I'm going to rename these. I'm going to lump intelligence under overall capability together with judgment and vision. Of these, I really think judgment is the most important. A leader has got to make just a bunch of decisions, and that involves judgment. And just as an aside, judgment is more important than positions that one takes on a number of issues. Years ago, someone at partner in my group suggested that any candidate for group leadership should be required to state their positions on a whole range of issues facing the group. And I struggled with that, and ultimately I realized that that's not what I wanted in a leader. I didn't care so much what their positions were on a bunch of issues. I wanted somebody with impeccable judgment, who would make the right decision at the right time in the group's best interest. Instead of energy, I'm going to use the popular hospital buzzword, engagement. This is, this includes participation, responsiveness, enthusiasm, willingness to commit the time. And unfortunately, time is key. There were times when I found myself attending both an early morning meeting before work and a late evening meeting after work on the same day. And occasionally I would even see the same hospital administrator at both of those. And as awful as that sounds, those opportunities are gold, because those people will never look at you the same way again, because they'll think about you differently. They see that you're as committed to their institution as they are. And so, try to make that into a positive, and hopefully it doesn't happen too often. Engagement can also be thought of as a form of leaning in. Sheryl Sandberg, CEO of Facebook, reminds us that no one gets to the corner office by sitting on the side, not at the table. So integrity, capability, energy, these kind of seem intrinsic to one's character and personality. We haven't seen the others yet, but it leads to the question, can leadership even be taught? And a variant of that question, can you teach leadership, was posed here at RSNA to Condoleezza Rice when she was the keynote speaker several years ago. She was asked by Sarah Donaldson what she thought of the efforts by RSNA and ACR to offer leadership training, and before catching herself and realizing how important this initiative was, she kind of just blurted out, and it sounded like it really came from a place of honesty. You can't teach leadership. There was an audible gasp in the room, and she quickly caught herself and followed with this quote. She said, "I think you can teach management. I would worry about taking up an already crowded curriculum to try and teach leadership. People learn to be leaders." And then she continued, "The most important thing they'll learn is your job as a leader to identify leadership skills in other people. If you try to lead on your own, you'll be out very far in front of nothing." So leadership grooming is this complicated process. You need to identify people with some set of innate skills and then teach them management skills to become better leaders. And one of the most important skills you teach them is to repeat that cycle, to start your succession planning early. I hope you'll find time to read this inspiring article from November 2017, New York Times, about Shalane Flanagan, the first American woman to win the New York Marathon in 40 years. This talks about not only her fierce work ethic, but what they call the Shalane Flanagan effect, that some of her success comes directly from the fact that she intentionally and deliberately sought to help other women train and compete alongside her. One of her acts as a leader that she is most celebrated for in the immediate aftermath of this incredible accomplishment is her willingness and ability to support and inspire others. And it's really a great story. So I'm going to add this near the bottom, this ability to support others and groom talent. We still haven't filled in some of the others. Now, these aren't really in order of importance so much, maybe in order of performance. You need the first few to select a good leader, and the others are needed for that leader to be effective. So what are we missing? After integrity, what's the most important quality in a leader? And for all your benefit, I've skipped the audience response question here in the sake of time. I would argue it's likability. This is critical. I've heard this, you don't want to elect your most abrasive partner to, quote, hold the line with hospitals or with others in negotiating. You want a leader to be influential, and if you don't like working with that person in the reading room, administration's not going to like dealing with them in the boardroom or the administrative conference room. They're not going to be included in critical meetings. You want a seat at the table, and you get it by being engaged, by being helpful, and by being likable. And remember, being likable doesn't mean that you can't advocate strongly for your practice. Remember, you can disagree without being disagreeable. So what else is important here? We're getting down to the final two. Resilience. If engagement is important, I like to think of resilience as the ability to stay engaged over time. Remember Survivor, it's outwit, outplay, and most importantly, outlast. If you get credibility by putting in time, then you develop the most credibility by your durability, putting in time over a long period of time. This takes self-discipline because you need to learn to avoid making critical mistakes. Losing your temper, banging your fist on the table, throwing a tantrum, sometimes is very tempting, but you only get to do that once, and then you're not going to be asked back to future meetings, so you're not going to be effective. You want a leader who is, if not unflappable, at least not very flappable. I think you need to learn how to rope-a-dope. This is a leadership strategy coming from my all-time favorite sports hero, Muhammad Ali, in his 1974 fight in Zaire, in which he used the ropes to conserve energy until late in the fight when he knocked out the heavily favored George Foreman. And to me, it's the perfect image, not so much as a physical strategy, hopefully not, but a state of mind, a sense of confidence and optimism that if you conserve your energy, you can withstand all the stuff that comes to you from the hospital, from turf battles, from everybody else. And in the end, you're going to be stronger for having withstood that and not losing it along the way. Well, lastly, what about communication? If leadership is about influencing others, obviously you have to be able to communicate well in order to have that influence. Dianne Feinstein says 90% of leadership is the ability to communicate something people want. There's a particular quality to communication, though, in this setting that I'm going to focus on, and that's transparency. Hospital administrators are uncomfortable with group leaders that they can't read or can't predict. Being able to communicate in a way that makes others feel like they're getting the whole story and the real story is important. And I would say that doctors and hospital administrators speak a different language. Even when you're both trying your hardest to be as clear as possible, there's a potential for miscommunication, so any caginess can just cause havoc. So there's my list. Integrity, likability, capability, engagement, resilience, transparency, ability to support others, a groom talent, and optimism. And if I have time, I'll run through a couple pearls for success. This one, I don't even need to remind you. Keep the patient in focus at all times. You don't want to give up the moral high ground here. It's your job to be the patient advocate in every situation. And the hospital administrators are really looking to you not to be the one who teaches them about budgets and operating cash flow and debt to credit ratios and all that kind of thing. They want you to be a doctor first, not a business person. Be the best prepared person in every meeting. I know that sounds kind of silly, but it's actually shockingly doable. Most people just show up to meetings and assume that work starts when the meeting starts, and that's not usually the case. Answer your phone and respond promptly to emails and texts. Our hospital CEO once told me he answers every email before he goes to bed that day, everything same day. I mean, kind of kooky, I don't do that, but imagine how you come across to that person when you answer his email a week later. It doesn't make a great impression. You also need to insist on administrative time so you can be available, but you can't count on your administrative time happening at the right time. You need to be available for these jobs. Speaking of email, I wish I could really spend a whole session on this. Learn the difference between the boxes and what to put where. I see so many mistakes with this that I'm going to actually review it. Bear with me. Here's an email. If you want something to get done and you list more than one person in this top box, this is the to box, it's not going to get done. There'll be plausible deniability. Each recipient can assume that someone else was actually supposed to do it. So one person's name goes in this box, everybody else's name goes in the next box, the CC box, and nobody's name goes in this third box, the BCC box. This can get you in a lot of trouble. Why would you copy someone without letting other people know that they're being copied? I've seen multiple instances where the person who was blind copied didn't realize they were blind copied. They then replied all, in a sense, outing the person who had blind copied them. When you receive email, pay attention to whether you were the primary recipient, were CC'd or BCC'd. It impacts how and whether you should reply. And lastly, speaking of reply all, just don't do that. It's almost never necessary. It's almost always better to reply individually to the person who sent the email. We all have our email boxes filled with reply all responses that are just annoying. This seems obvious, be nice. Just remember the future hospital VP or president that you're going to be dealing with when you become a leader in your practice or department is probably a mid-level manager, a nurse, or a department head somewhere today. And they'll remember. But be nice also because it's the right thing to do. Be grounded. This is an extension of number one. But patient well-being obviously should be your first focus, but it's appropriate to have a short set of additional priorities. You want to be grounded in something. For me, I absolutely wanted to be a responsible hospital partner. I believe we're all best served when the hospitals are successful. I also had no problem arguing about the needs of our group, especially, what I would say is the absolute need to continue to be able to recruit the best and brightest to our practice. So I was comfortable having that be, one of my top few priorities. Be sincere. This gets back to the keys to success. Your reputation obviously is everything. And it's a great opportunity to quote Sheryl Sandberg a second time, because I think this perfectly expresses the sentiment and maybe is a counterpoint to my entire talk. Presenting leadership as a list of carefully defined qualities no longer holds. So thank you, Sheryl. I've just finished that talk. Instead, true leadership stems from individuality that is honestly and sometimes imperfectly expressed. Leaders should strive for authenticity over perfection. Leaders should strive for authenticity over perfection. Don't worry so much about all these other details that you aren't just being genuine. Pay attention to the efforts of others, acknowledge them when appropriate. A good leader is not afraid to give others credit for their efforts, so you don't want to be threatened by other talent. You want to try to work through conflict constructively and deal directly and privately with those who disagree with you, not through email or public shaming. And sometimes you have to just agree to disagree respectfully. This is the plug to participate in organized radiology. Those of you who are active in the RFC already meet this, and you already know what I'm going to say. Our regional and national radiology societies can serve as the bridge between academic and private practice. For those of you struggling, thinking you're going to give up one as you choose the other, that doesn't have to be true. Stay actively involved in organized radiology, and you can have a little bit of the best of both worlds. These are great opportunities for leadership experience, and they foster lifelong relationships. It's really been among the most personally rewarding parts of my entire career. I'm not going to go in any detail on these. These are bonus tips, and I'd like to save time if we can, but attack the hills. Don't spend time on the things that are unpleasant for you. Just dive right in. If you're a runner or a cyclist, you know what attack the hills means. Go for it. Figure out what you're not going to do and delegate that to others, and then just let them be. Don't interfere. And there are more and more opportunities now for personal growth, leadership training, physician wellness exercises. I had avoided those like the plague, my whole life, maybe because I'm both the son and husband of psychiatrists. Somehow I just didn't like that touchy-feely stuff, but I have actually embraced that more recently and loved it. So those can be fantastic opportunities, and I really encourage you to not wait as long as I did to get involved in those kind of things. So lastly, in the do what I say, not what I do category, be short-winded. This is my daughter on the right demonstrating the tenets of group dynamics with her friends. Thank you very much.